21. Black R&B legends who have children with disabilities. They had the fame, the fortune, and the voices that shaped generations, but behind the velvet curtains and Grammy stages, these 21 Black R&B legends were hiding unimaginable pain. From life-changing accidents to rare and incurable diseases, their children's struggles revealed the raw human side of stardom the world never sees. This isn't just about music, it's about love loss and the strength of fathers who refuse to give up. Get ready to uncover the emotional truth behind the legends. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence for more powerful, untold stories that deserve to be heard. Toni Braxton. Toni Braxton, celebrated for her soulful voice and 6 Grammy Awards, rose to stardom with timeless hits like Unbreak My Heart and Breathe Again. Yet away from the flashing cameras and glamorous red carpets, Toni's most challenging and transformative role wasn't on stage. It was that of a mother to a child diagnosed with autism. In 2006, Toni noticed behavioral differences in her youngest son, Diesel. Unlike his older brother, Denim, Diesel was unresponsive to his name, avoided eye contact, and had delayed speech. At just 3 years old, he was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, ASD, a revelation that redefined Toni's priorities overnight. At the time, Braxton was juggling a high-profile music career, media appearances, and financial struggles, including a widely publicized bankruptcy. Yet none of that mattered more than her son's health and future. She became a fierce advocate, diving into research, exploring early intervention therapies, and consulting specialists across the country. Her determination led her to speak openly about the importance of early diagnosis and intervention topics often stigmatized in the Black community. Toni has shared the guilt she carried during pregnancy, believing stress from financial pressures and her lupus diagnosis might have contributed to Diesel's condition. Though unproven, that belief fueled her commitment to ensuring her son had access to every possible support. She halted her career at multiple points, canceling shows and appearances to remain present for his therapy and care. Today, Diesel is in his early 20s and thriving in ways that once seemed impossible. He expresses himself through abstract art and has made impressive strides in communication. Braxton, meanwhile, has used her platform to fundraise for autism organizations and promote acceptance through visibility. While her music cemented her status as an icon, Toni Braxton's greatest legacy may be her unrelenting dedication to her son. Her story has inspired countless parents navigating similar paths, proving that strength doesn't always roar from a microphone. Sometimes it whispers in quiet acts of love, resilience, and unwavering presence. Ray Charles. Ray Charles, the iconic architect of soul music, mesmerized the world with his masterful blend of gospel blues and jazz. Blinded by glaucoma at the age of 7, Ray overcame adversity to become a musical trailblazer with over a dozen Grammy Awards and hits like Georgia on My Mind and I Got a Woman. Yet despite his legendary career and personal resilience, nothing prepared him for the trauma of nearly losing his son to a devastating accident. In 1968, during a tour stop in Atlanta, Ray took a rare break to enjoy time with his family. The joy of togetherness quickly turned into tragedy when the family's car was struck by a drunk driver during a violent rainstorm. Ray's 10-year-old son David was thrown from the vehicle and sustained a severe head injury. The result, a traumatic brain injury that left him partially paralyzed and permanently confined to a wheelchair. Though Ray couldn't witness the accident due to his blindness, the sounds of metal crunching and his son's cries would echo in his memory forever. He rushed to Grady Memorial Hospital, refusing to leave David's bedside. As the world demanded more music, Ray turned inward. He canceled tours, funneled his earnings into specialized care, and remodeled his home with ramps and lifts to accommodate his son's new reality. David's recovery was slow and painful, filled with surgeries, therapies, and emotional hurdles. Despite the odds, he learned to navigate the world in his own way, even attempting to play piano like his father. Still, the limitations were many, and Ray's heart carried that burden. The grief subtly crept into his music. His later works were marked by introspection, sorrow, and tenderness not present in his earlier, more jubilant recordings. Songs once driven by celebration became infused with quiet lament. Ray Charles may have changed the face of American music, but his most profound transformation happened in private. Behind the legend was a man reckoning with helplessness, guilt, and the enduring pain of a father watching his child's life altered in a split-second, proof that even greatness cannot shield us from life's cruel turns. James Brown. James Brown wasn't just a performer, he was a cultural earthquake. Known as the godfather of funk, his explosive footwork, guttural shouts, and revolutionary grooves reshaped American music and fueled social movements. But away from the spotlight, Brown faced a moment that shook him deeper than any stage could ever reach. In 1975, while laying down tracks in a New York City studio, Brown received a chilling call that would alter his world forever. His 18-year-old son, Terry, had been severely injured in a workplace accident at a Georgia factory. A malfunctioning industrial machine had caught Terry's leg, mangling it beyond repair. The doctors had no choice but to amputate from the knee down. Brown dropped everything, catching the first flight home. Seeing his son unconscious in the ICU, hooked to tubes and monitors, brought the larger-than-life star to his knees. Terry, once a vibrant young man dreaming of becoming an engineer, was suddenly thrust into a new reality of pain, prosthetics, and profound psychological trauma. Haunted by his absence, James struggled with overwhelming guilt. His dedication to performing, touring, and protecting his empire had left little room for close supervision. In an effort to compensate, he financed Terry's recovery, invested in prosthetic technology, and supported safety programs for young workers. Though Terry eventually adapted, he retreated from the limelight and chose a life of privacy. Meanwhile, James Brown's music became more urgent, his stage presence more aggressive, as if every scream and spin masked a man trying to undo what couldn't be undone. Behind the bravado and showmanship was a father grappling with regret. Brown never publicly spoke at length about the accident, but those closest to him knew the truth. He could command any room, electrify any crowd, but he could not change that one split second when a machine stole his son's future. For James Brown, that silent wound followed him until his final bow. Barry White. Barry White. The master of seduction built an empire on smooth baritone vocals, romantic orchestration, and timeless love songs like "Can't Get Enough of Your Love, Babe." His music pulsed with sensuality and confidence, yet few fans knew that behind the romance and satin lyrics lay a chapter of deep paternal anguish. In 1985, as Barry prepared for a sold-out show in Las Vegas, his wife Glodian called in tears. Their 12-year-old daughter, Denise, had been diagnosed with acute leukemia. The signs had been subtle bruises, fatigue, low-grade fevers, but the diagnosis was aggressive, requiring immediate chemotherapy. Barry abandoned his show, rushing to Children's Hospital Los Angeles, and didn't leave her side for weeks. The treatments were grueling. Denise endured night after night of vomiting, hair loss, and needle pricks. Barry, heartbroken and helpless, held her hand through every session, whispering comfort in the same voice that once melted millions. Then came another devastating blow. Doctors suggested that Denise's prolonged exposure to secondhand smoke from parties and studio environments could have contributed to her illness. Barry was crushed. His lifestyle, one filled with cigars and crowded backstage gatherings, now felt like a personal betrayal. Though Denise survived, her recovery came with permanent costs. The powerful chemotherapy affected her hearing. By 16, she needed hearing aids and could no longer enjoy the music that once surrounded her life. The once vibrant teen stepped away from public life and instead worked quietly in children's cancer support. Barry never smoked another cigar again. He also changed his music. The bold, lusty productions gave way to introspective, heartfelt ballads. His later albums reflected a subdued tone, as if each note carried the weight of sorrow and redemption. More than a superstar, Barry White became a humbled father, one who learned the hard way that love isn't just spoken in lyrics or sung from a stage. Sometimes it's whispered in hospital corridors and lived out in quiet repentance. Denise's journey became the invisible thread in his music's evolution, tying his golden voice to something deeper, the cost of unintentional harm and the fight for healing. Stevie Wonder. Stevie Wonder. The prodigious talent who changed the soundscape of R&B, funk, and soul with his vibrant harmonies and social consciousness has long been hailed as a musical visionary. With over 25 Grammy Awards and a legacy that spans 6 decades, Wonder is often seen as untouchable in talent and spirit. But in 1992, his world was brought to its knees not by fame, but by a single devastating phone call. While immersed in studio recordings, Wonder was informed by Yolanda Simmons, the mother of his son Mumtaz Morris, that their 9-year-old boy had suffered a critical fall. While playing in a Detroit park, Mumtaz had climbed a tree to retrieve a tangled kite. The branch gave way. He plummeted 16 feet, landing headfirst on hard soil. The impact fractured his spine and rendered him a quadriplegic. Stevie rushed to Detroit Children's Hospital, consumed with grief and regret. Though blind, he could feel the despair in the room, the weight of silence heavier than any lyric he'd ever written. As doctors delivered the heartbreaking prognosis, permanent paralysis, he knew their lives had changed forever. Wonder spared no expense acquiring state-of-the-art mobility equipment, hiring expert caregivers, and retrofitting his home to suit his son's new needs. Yet despite the financial resources, the emotional toll was immense. Mumtaz faced frequent health complications and bouts of depression. But something beautiful emerged amid the suffering. Mumtaz discovered a gift for writing. He began crafting poems and short stories that reflected resilience and imagination. Father and son grew closer through creativity. Stevie often edited his son's pieces and encouraged him to find his voice outside the shadow of tragedy. While Mumtaz's body remained bound, his mind soared through storytelling. Musically, Stevie's compositions took on a more solemn, reflective tone during the 1990s. Though he never directly addressed the accident in lyrics, the sorrow threaded through his melodies was unmistakable. In the quiet hours between tours and tributes, Stevie Wonder wasn't just a legend. He was a father navigating loss with grace, helping his son rediscover joy in a world forever altered. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye, often referred to as the voice of Motown's conscience, gave the world masterpieces like What's Going On and Mercy. Mercy Me songs that reflected both pain and hope with poetic elegance. But behind the silky falsetto and introspective lyrics was a father deeply wounded by an incident that changed his family forever. It was December 1978 when an ordinary evening in Los Angeles spiraled into disaster. An old space heater malfunctioned in Marvin's home, sparking a fire that spread swiftly through the hallway. Trapped behind a locked bedroom door was Frankie Gaye's youngest son, just 5 years old at the time. His mother, Janice Hunter, fought through smoke and flame to rescue him, managing to pull the child out just as firefighters arrived. But the damage had been done. Frankie had gone without oxygen for over 9 minutes before being revived. Doctors at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center delivered a crushing diagnosis: permanent brain damage due to extended oxygen deprivation. Though Frankie's life was spared, his cognitive development halted. He would remain mentally and emotionally frozen at the level of a young child for the rest of his life. Marvin was devastated. He blamed himself relentlessly, not only for failing to replace the outdated heater, but also for being absent during the catastrophe. He poured every ounce of financial and emotional support into Frankie's care, enrolling him in special schools, funding experimental treatments, and ensuring round-the-clock support. Frankie grew up with limited communication skills and required full-time supervision. His world became one of colorful drawings, toys, and childlike innocence, a stark contrast to the complexities of his father's musical legacy. Marvin's sorrow became an unspoken undercurrent in his later work. His 1978 album, Hear My Dear, and subsequent songs carried tones of melancholy and guilt masked beneath polished production. Gaye rarely spoke about Frankie publicly, but those who knew him understood that the fire left a scar deeper than any public heartbreak. The man who gave voice to a generation's grief carried his own silent suffering, a reminder that even those who heal the world sometimes can't mend the pain at home. Al Green. Al Green, the legendary voice behind classics like Let's Stay Together and Love and Happiness, inspired generations with his tender vocals and eventual transition into gospel. Revered for his musical redemption and spiritual journey, Green preached faith and healing from the pulpit. Yet behind closed doors, he faced a private trial that tested that very faith, a battle for his daughter's life. In the late 1980s, Green was pastoring at a Memphis church when he received life-altering news. His 10-year-old daughter, Cora, had been diagnosed with systemic lupus erythematosus, a debilitating autoimmune disease. What started as mild fatigue and facial rashes soon escalated into debilitating joint pain organ complications and repeated hospitalizations. Doctors warned of long-term kidney damage and immune failure. Green was shattered. He had always believed in divine protection, yet here was his daughter, his own flesh and blood, enduring unspeakable pain. Torn between his ministry music and fatherhood, Green chose to step back from his career and center his life around Cora's care. He converted part of their home into a dialysis room, hired a team of specialists, and spared no expense to provide holistic treatment. Still, some nights were unbearable. Cora's condition fluctuated constantly. One day she could walk, the next, she could barely lift her head from the pillow. Watching her suffer filled Al with guilt and desperation, especially after environmental concerns surfaced about a polluted river in Arkansas where Cora had swum the summer before her symptoms began. Despite her struggles, Cora found solace in journaling and gospel music, often singing along with her father even through pain. For Green, each sermon and song thereafter carried a deeper plea, a direct prayer for his daughter's healing. Now in her mid-40s, Cora still contends with the chronic pain of lupus, often using a wheelchair. Al Green, no longer just a musical icon or minister, became an unwavering caregiver and spiritual warrior. His legacy is more than music. It is love in its most sacrificial form, built not on stage lights, but on sleepless nights, whispered prayers, and quiet faith. Rick James, the flamboyant funk maestro known for hits like Super Freak and Give It To Me Baby, was the embodiment of bold, unrestrained musical energy in the 1980s. His performances were electric, his style provocative, and his life unapologetically excessive. But behind the glittering persona was a man whose heart was permanently fractured by a tragedy that no fame could mend. In 1995, Rick's life took a devastating turn. His youngest son, Trey, was just 7 years old when he was involved in a horrific car accident. Riding home from piano lessons with his mother on a rainy night in Buffalo, New York, their vehicle was struck from behind by a drunk driver traveling at high speed. The impact flipped the car multiple times across the highway. Trey was unconscious when first responders arrived. At the hospital, doctors delivered the devastating diagnosis: severe spinal cord damage that left the boy paralyzed from the waist down. Rick was in the studio when he received the call and rushed to the hospital only to be met with a future he was powerless to change. Overwhelmed by guilt and fury, Rick redirected his fortune into Trey's recovery. He equipped his home with wheelchair access, secured top-tier rehabilitation services, and personally oversaw his son's adaptation to a new reality. Trey, though confined to a wheelchair, found resilience through music, eventually producing beats and experimenting with sound in his father's studio. For Rick, however, the emotional toll was immense. Known for excess and indulgence, the pain of seeing his son's suffering fueled a downward spiral. His music darkened, reflecting inner torment rather than celebration. The once vibrant king of funk withdrew, his stage persona dimmed by sleepless nights and the haunting thought of what might have been. Though Trey found purpose in creative expression, Rick never fully healed. Friends say that night on the highway changed him forever. No encore could mask the anguish of a father who would never again see his child run into his arms. Rick James died not just a funk legend, but a man eternally marked by the cost of one reckless moment. Isaac Hayes, the deep-voiced pioneer of soul and funk, known for the theme from Shaft, and his commanding presence in both music and film, was a towering figure in entertainment. Draped in gold chains and backed by rich orchestral arrangements, he redefined black masculinity and artistic ambition in the 1970s. But behind the bravado was a father blindsided by a painful medical crisis that would alter his family's path forever. In 1982, Hayes noticed something peculiar in a photograph taken during a family portrait session. His 8-year-old daughter Felicia had a strange white reflection in one of her eyes. At first glance, it seemed like a trick of the flash, but something in his gut said otherwise. He took Felicia to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, where she was diagnosed with retinoblastoma, a rare and aggressive eye cancer affecting children. Tumors had developed in both of her eyes. Doctors had no choice to save her life. One eye had to be removed, and the other was at serious risk. Felicia underwent invasive surgeries and chemotherapy, spending months confined to hospital beds, her world gradually dimming. Hayes was devastated. He canceled tours, walked away from projects, and devoted himself entirely to her recovery. The man who had once captivated audiences with symphonic soul music now sat quietly by his daughter's bedside, holding her hand in silence. Eventually, Felicia lost significant vision in both eyes and had to adjust to life as a visually impaired child. Yet she found light in the darkness. Through touch and memory, she taught herself to play the organ, channeling the music her father had given the world into her own form of therapy and empowerment. Hayes, who rarely spoke publicly about his daughter's condition, funneled his guilt into action, funding cancer research initiatives and donating to hospitals. His music in the years that followed became slower, more introspective, marked by mournful strings and minor chords. Isaac Hayes may be remembered for his voice and his flair, but his legacy also lies in the quiet resilience he nurtured in his daughter, and the melody that continued even in silence. Chaka Khan, Chaka Khan. The electrifying voice behind hits like Ain't Nobody, and I'm Every Woman has long reigned as the queen of funk. With 10 Grammy wins and a career spanning 5 decades, her presence on stage has always been commanding, passionate, and defiant. Yet beyond the glitter and applause, Khan faced a private battle that brought her to her knees, the fight for her son's life and stability after a life-altering accident. In 1988, just before a scheduled West Coast performance, Chaka received a horrifying call. Her 9-year-old son, Jamil, had suffered a tragic fall from a second-story balcony in their Chicago home while reaching for a toy during playtime. He landed headfirst on concrete, causing a traumatic brain injury that triggered uncontrollable seizures. Doctors diagnosed him with lifelong epilepsy and warned of a long, difficult road ahead. Chaka was devastated. She canceled her tour, withdrew from the public eye, and transformed her life overnight to become a full-time caregiver. Between flights to specialists and emergency room visits, she restructured her schedule to focus solely on her son's well-being. Some nights, Jamil's seizures were so violent, they stopped his breathing, forcing Khan to stay awake in vigil, terrified he wouldn't make it through the night. The guilt of not being home the moment it happened haunted her. She questioned the design of the home, the lack of safeguards, the timing of her tour. But amid the anguish, she found strength devoting herself to researching epilepsy treatments, funding medical advancements, and speaking publicly about the challenges of raising a child with an invisible disability. Jamil, now an adult, continues to live with seizures, but has found his own rhythm through creative expression. Meanwhile, Chaka's music took on a more vulnerable tone. Her performances carried new emotional weight, each lyric sung not just for the crowd, but for the son she almost lost. Behind her powerhouse vocals and fierce persona is a mother whose courage redefined her fame. Chaka Khan didn't just raise the roof, she raised a son through the hardest storm of her life, proving that real strength sometimes lives not in defiance, but in devotion. Eddie Levert. Eddie Levert, the unmistakable voice behind the OJs and soulful anthems like Love Train and Backstabbers, has long been celebrated for his powerful vocals and timeless messages about love, struggle, and unity. But behind the music, Levert endured a deeply personal struggle, one that tested every part of his heart and faith. In 1990, Eddie's youngest daughter, Candace, collapsed during a school dance rehearsal. Only 8 years old at the time, she had shown no obvious signs of illness, just a bit of fatigue and shortness of breath. After an emergency evaluation at the Cleveland Clinic, doctors delivered the shocking diagnosis, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a genetic condition that causes the heart muscle to thicken abnormally, leading to dangerous arrhythmias and sudden cardiac arrest. Eddie was touring when the news came in. He raced home filled with panic and guilt. The doctors explained that a recent high fever, likely from a flu, had pushed Candace's weakened heart to a critical threshold. From that moment forward, her life changed forever. Running, dancing, and any strenuous activity were off limits. A defibrillator was implanted in her chest, acting as a lifeline in case her heart ever stopped again. Levert, consumed by fear and helplessness, made her condition his mission. He funded her care, took time off from recording, and founded a regional heart disease research initiative in Ohio to support other families facing similar battles. His music in the 1990s reflected this transition, often layered with a newfound tenderness and prayer-like urgency. Candace, now in her 40s, lives a quiet life working as a graphic designer. Though her energy is limited, she expresses herself artistically while managing her condition. The Leverts remain extremely close. Her resilience a daily inspiration to the man who once sang about love on the global stage, but now defines it in much deeper terms. For Eddie, no arena could ever compare to the silent war he wages as a father, hoping each heartbeat brings his daughter another day of joy. Philip Bailey. The soaring falsetto behind Earth, Wind & Fire's most iconic tracks like Reason's Fantasy and After the Love Has Gone gave soul music a celestial glow. His voice, often described as angelic, was the sound of optimism and spiritual uplift. Yet in 1999, as his voice rang out across stages worldwide, Bailey faced a devastating blow that left one of his children unable to hear it. During a 4th of July neighborhood celebration in Denver, Bailey's 10-year-old son Isaiah was standing nearby when a neighbor carelessly lit an industrial-grade firework far too close to the gathering. The explosion was deafening and catastrophic. The blast ruptured Isaiah's eardrums. One ear was destroyed completely, the other barely saved by an emergency operation. Overnight, the world of sound vanished for the boy whose father was defined by it. Bailey was performing when the incident happened. The moment he got the call, he left the tour immediately and returned home. Watching Isaiah struggle with fear, confusion, and physical trauma gutted him. The journey that followed was brutal. Dozens of hospital visits, painful procedures, hearing aids, and countless hours of speech and auditory therapy. Determined to prevent similar tragedies, Philip launched a fireworks safety campaign and donated to child trauma centers in Denver. At home, he became Isaiah's personal interpreter, learning lip reading alongside his son and adjusting their household to be communication-friendly. Despite the challenge, Isaiah eventually adapted. He found new ways to connect through music. He could feel vibrations, rhythm, and written lyrics. For Philip, the tragedy reshaped his artistry. The grooves remained, but the message grew deeper. His later work leaned more into spiritual reflection, loss, and the quiet strength of parental love. What once were dance floor anthems became lullabies of healing. Though his son can no longer hear the full range of his father's voice, their bond resonates stronger than any melody. Philip Bailey remains a musical legend, but perhaps even more so a father whose love endures long after the last note fades. Smokey Robinson. Smokey Robinson, the velvet-voiced leader of the Miracles and one of Motown's most prolific songwriters, is often credited with giving soul music its poetic heart. With timeless hits like Cruisin' and Tracks of My Tears, Robinson serenaded the world with lyrics drenched in love and elegance. But behind the flawless falsetto was a man facing a quiet war. Few ever saw a terrifying ordeal that nearly cost his son his life. In 1983, Smokey's world turned upside down. His 10-year-old son, Trey, collapsed after a casual basketball game at their Detroit home. What seemed like exhaustion quickly escalated to unconsciousness. He was rushed to Henry Ford Hospital, where doctors diagnosed him with type 1 diabetes, a chronic autoimmune condition that destroys the body's ability to produce insulin. Trey had fallen into a diabetic coma. Robinson, in the middle of preparing for a concert tour, was blindsided. The image of his son lying motionless attached to tubes and monitors would haunt him forever. As Trey's life hung in the balance, Smokey stood vigil praying and pleading for his recovery. Though Trey pulled through, the challenges didn't end there. His life became a daily routine of insulin shots, glucose monitoring, and strict dietary management. Later complications, including diabetic retinopathy, threatened his eyesight. Smokey, devastated by what he saw as missed warning signs, fatigue, excessive thirst, threw himself into learning everything he could about diabetes. He funded cutting-edge treatments, worked closely with specialists, and invested in public education campaigns to raise awareness in underserved communities. Meanwhile, his music took on new emotional depth. His romantic themes remained, but beneath them ran a current of real-world pain, a parent's fear, a protector's helplessness. Trey, now an adult, manages his condition and runs a blog to support others living with diabetes. His father, once the Prince of Motown, now sings with a voice shaped by love that's been tested and a heart forever marked by a night that changed everything. Ronald Isley. Ronald Isley. The unmistakable frontman of the Isley Brothers helped define decades of soul, funk, and R&B with genre-bending hits like Between the Sheets, For the Love of You, and That Lady. With his signature falsetto and magnetic stage presence, Isley carved out a legendary status in black music history. But few know that in 1996, far from the spotlight, Isley experienced a life-shattering event that redefined his purpose not as an artist, but as a father. During the aftermath of a storm in St. Louis, Ronald's 12-year-old daughter, Trisha, was helping clear debris from the roof of their family home. In a tragic misstep, she lost her balance and fell 13 feet onto hard concrete below. The fall crushed parts of her spine and left her paralyzed on the right side of her body. Ronald, devastated and shaken, rushed her to Barnes Jewish Hospital. The prognosis was grim. While Trisha survived, she would require a wheelchair for mobility and ongoing physical therapy for the rest of her life. For a man who spent years singing about love and pleasure, nothing had prepared him for this kind of heartbreak. Isley immediately shifted gears. He put his music career on hold to focus on his daughter's rehabilitation. He retrofitted his home for accessibility, hired a team of therapists, and poured his earnings into making sure Trisha could still pursue education, independence, and joy, just in a different form. Guilt lingered heavily. He blamed himself for not preventing her from going up on the roof, and that regret echoed in his private moments. Musically, the change was profound. The Isley Brothers' late 90s work carried a deeper emotional register. The sensual, slow jams were still present, but woven between them were songs tinged with sorrow, hope, and resilience. Ronald's voice, already rich with feeling, now carried the weight of a father's deepest pain and fiercest love. Trisha, now an adult, lives a life marked by courage and determination. She paints and writes, using her creativity to find peace. And Ronald, ever her biggest supporter, has shown that even legends must sometimes rise from personal tragedy to become true heroes at home. Otis Redding. Otis Redding, known for his emotionally raw voice and timeless hits like Try a Little Tenderness and Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay, remains one of the most revered voices in soul music history. His impassioned delivery and heartfelt lyrics helped define a generation. But beyond the studio, Redding faced a moment of devastating tragedy that few fans ever knew. In 1966, at the height of his fame, a horrifying household accident left a permanent mark on his family. His youngest daughter, Demetria, a toddler at the time, was playing near the kitchen while her mother briefly stepped away to answer the phone. In that short window, Demetria climbed onto a chair near the stove and accidentally tipped over a pot of boiling water. The scalding liquid covered more than 40% of her body, leaving her with third-degree burns across her arm, chest, and side. She was rushed to the emergency room in critical condition. By the time Otis arrived returning from tour, his daughter was heavily bandaged unconscious and fighting for her life. The burns caused permanent damage to her left arm, twisting and limiting its mobility. Years of skin grafts, painful therapy sessions, and emotional scars followed. Otis, shattered by guilt, canceled performances and poured his time and resources into Demetria's recovery. Though he was a man used to captivating audiences with raw emotion, this pain was different. It was silent, private, and unfixable. While Otis continued making music, something in his tone shifted. Sittin' on the Dock of the Bay, recorded shortly before his untimely death in 1967, carries a haunting sense of reflection. The carefree energy of earlier recordings had been replaced with a quiet, almost mournful introspection. Demetria would go on to lead a private life far from the spotlight. Her scars faded over time, but her father's heartbreak never did. Otis Redding left the world far too soon, but those who knew him understood that behind his booming voice was a man deeply humbled by a single moment that changed everything. Bobby Womack. Bobby Womack, the gravel-voiced soul singer behind hits like If You Think You're Lonely. Now and across 110th Street lived a life as complex as his music. A trailblazer who blended gospel roots with raw R&B emotion, Womack's career was filled with triumphs, controversies, and reinvention. But nothing would shake him more than the terrifying moment he almost lost his son and the irreversible outcome that followed. In 1981, Womack's 9-year-old son, Truth, suffered a life-altering health crisis. What began as a minor scratch on his leg, picked up innocently while playing outside, quickly turned serious. Within days, Truth spiked a high fever and began seizing. Doctors diagnosed him with bacterial meningitis, a fast-moving infection that attacks the brain and spinal cord. At the time, Bobby was on tour in Chicago. By the time he rushed back to Los Angeles, his son had slipped into a coma. Womack waited by his side, watching helplessly as doctors administered powerful antibiotics and life-saving procedures. Truth eventually woke up, but the infection had done irreversible damage to his brain. The vibrant, curious boy Bobby once knew could no longer communicate as before. His developmental progress halted. He required round-the-clock care and would never regain the cognitive abilities he had once shown so brightly. Bobby, overwhelmed with sorrow and guilt for not being there sooner, quietly stepped back from music for a time. He invested heavily in Truth's medical care specialist doctors, private therapy, and custom learning programs, desperately hoping to spark recovery. But progress was limited. The emotional toll showed in Womack's later music. His recordings in the 1980s and 90s grew heavier, filled with melancholy and haunting lyricism. Despite his public persona as a bold, outspoken artist, Womack rarely spoke about truth in interviews. Those close to him knew the weight he carried every day. Fame, awards, and adoration meant little compared to the pain of seeing his child trapped in a world that no longer made sense. In the end, Bobby Womack's story is not just one of soul music greatness, but also of silent heartbreak, the kind that humbles even the loudest voices. Wilson Pickett. Wilson Pickett, known for his ferocious vocals and explosive performances on hits like In the Midnight Hour and Land of 1,000 Dances, brought an unmatched fire to soul music. Dubbed the Wicked Pickett, he was a powerhouse in the 1960s and 70s, electrifying crowds with his gritty delivery and stage dominance. But one tragic summer day in 1979 would bring the fierce performer to a place of vulnerability he had never known. That afternoon, his 11-year-old son Rodney was riding his bike near their Alabama home when a speeding motorcycle came out of nowhere. The driver didn't see him in time. The collision was violent. Rodney was thrown from his bike and slammed into a curb with such force that bystanders feared the worst. He was rushed to the University of Alabama Hospital, where after hours of emergency surgery, doctors delivered the devastating news Rodney would never walk again. The spinal damage was too severe. His once carefree days of biking and playing with friends had been replaced with hospital stays, physical therapy, and a wheelchair. Pickett was shattered. Known for his hard-edged persona, he became deeply protective and tender when it came to his son. He converted part of their home to be fully accessible, funded Rodney's therapy, and stayed close to him whenever off tour. The man who once commanded audiences with raw energy now sat quietly at his son's bedside, reading stories and learning how to adjust to this new life. The emotional impact transformed Pickett's music. His recordings in the following years carried a weightier tone with more introspective lyrics and less flamboyance. Though he never spoke openly in interviews about the accident, insiders say it haunted him deeply. Rodney eventually adjusted to his new life, becoming active in his community and mentoring other youth with mobility challenges. For Wilson Pickett, the man known for soul-shaking screams, his son's silence and resilience became the most profound sound he'd ever known. Donny Hathaway. Donny Hathaway, one of the most revered voices in soul music, gave the world deeply emotional masterpieces like A Song for You and Someday We'll All Be Free. His music was spiritual, introspective, and full of aching beauty. But what most fans never knew is that behind that transcendent voice was a father waging a silent war against an invisible enemy, threatening his daughter's life. In 1975, Hathaway and his wife were blindsided when doctors diagnosed their 4-year-old daughter, Donita, with cystic fibrosis, a hereditary disease that slowly deteriorates the lungs and digestive system. What they had assumed were routine coughs and childhood fatigue turned out to be symptoms of a lifelong illness. Donny was gutted. He had long battled mental health struggles himself, and now he found himself in another fight, one he couldn't win, with melody or prayer alone. Cystic fibrosis demanded daily chest physiotherapy, oxygen support, enzyme medications, and constant hospital visits. A simple cold could spiral into a respiratory crisis. Despite his growing fame, Hathaway stepped back from public appearances and canceled sessions to be with Donita. He poured his earnings into experimental treatments, private care, and cutting-edge research, hoping to buy her time and comfort. The family did everything possible, even retrofitting their home with medical equipment to stabilize her condition. The sorrow of Donita's struggle found its way into Donny's music. Someday We'll All Be Free, long considered a civil rights anthem, was in many ways a personal plea for his daughter to live without tubes, machines, or daily suffering. Though Donita survived into adolescence, she carried the burden of a chronic disease that shaped every moment of her life. Hathaway, tormented by helplessness and worsening mental health, tragically passed in 1979. His legacy lives on not just in records, but in the unspoken pain he carried for his daughter. Donny Hathaway wasn't just singing to the world, he was singing for his child, wishing for the day she could finally breathe free. Jeffrey Osborne. Jeffrey Osborne, the velvety voice behind romantic staples like On the Wings of Love and Stay With Me Tonight, made his mark in the 1980s with a sound that was both passionate and pure. But while his music spoke to themes of love and connection, Osborne was privately fighting a battle that no ballad could ease the relentless decline of his son's health due to a rare and devastating disease. In 1993, Jeffrey's 10-year-old son Marcus began showing signs that something wasn't right. He struggled to keep up during sports, stumbled frequently, and complained of sore legs. At first, doctors suspected growing pains. But after a deeper examination at Boston Children's Hospital, the family received a heartbreaking diagnosis: Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a degenerative condition that gradually destroys muscle function and has no known cure. Osborne was devastated. The energetic child who once ran beside him now faced a life sentence of gradual physical decline. After a severe fall during a soccer game, Marcus lost the use of his legs. Wheelchair-bound by his early teens, his condition progressed rapidly, requiring assistance with basic daily functions. Jeffrey dropped everything. Tours were cut short. Recording sessions paused. He devoted himself entirely to his son's care and quality of life. He invested millions in therapy, assistive technology, and research funding for muscular dystrophy, hoping not just for a miracle, but for dignity in Marcus's day-to-day life. The emotional toll reshaped Osborne's music. Once a symbol of romantic uplift, his songs took on more spiritual, reflective undertones. On the wings of love transformed in meaning, it was no longer about courtship, but about a father's undying hope to lift his son above his pain. Though Marcus's mobility diminished, his spirit never did. He became a voice for others with rare diseases, helping raise awareness through advocacy and writing. And behind him stood Jeffrey, still singing, but now as a father, first carrying his son through each verse, each breath, and each prayer-filled note. Luther Vandross, the master of romantic soul and powerhouse ballads like Dance with My Father and Here and Now, captivated millions with his lush vocals and heartfelt lyrics. Known for crafting love songs that became wedding anthems and tearjerkers, Vandross radiated elegance and vulnerability. But behind the curtains, Luther's own story of fatherhood was marked by a tragedy that shook his world and reshaped his legacy. Though he never had biological children, Vandross chose to become a father through adoption. His 3 adopted children became his pride and joy, proof that love could be chosen, not just inherited. Among them, his second son, Kevin, was especially close to Luther's heart. Kevin was a curious, outgoing boy who often joined his father at rehearsals and studio sessions. But in 1998, during a volunteer summer cleaning program at a New York camp, Kevin's life changed forever. While helping organize a maintenance closet, a container of industrial-strength cleaning chemicals fell from a shelf and splashed directly into his face. The accident caused catastrophic chemical burns to both eyes. Despite immediate medical intervention and multiple corneal transplants, the damage was irreversible. Kevin was left completely blind. Luther was inconsolable. He blamed himself, wondering if he should have prevented Kevin from working that summer or checked the safety protocols himself. In the weeks that followed, Vandross canceled shows and poured everything into Kevin's recovery. He funded treatments, advanced assistive technology, and worked with specialists to help Kevin adjust to life in darkness. More importantly, he became Kevin's rock, teaching him to navigate by sound, supporting his emotional healing, and helping him explore music through touch and vibration. Luther's love became louder than ever, but this time it wasn't on stage. Dance with My Father, released in 2003, took on layered meaning. While it paid homage to Luther's own late father, it also echoed the bond he shared with Kevin. A song of loss, yes, but also of guidance, presence, and everlasting devotion. Luther Vandross didn't just sing about love, he lived it through sacrifice, silent prayers, and the steadfast hand he held for a son who could no longer see but always felt the depth of his father's care. Freddie Jackson, the silky smooth voice behind slow jam staples like Rock Me Tonight and You Are My Lady, rose to fame in the mid-1980s as the king of quiet storm R&B. His voice became the soundtrack of love and intimacy for a generation. But far from the romantic lyrics and dimly lit stages, Jackson faced a personal nightmare, one that struck without warning and tested his strength as a father beyond anything the spotlight ever demanded. In 2001, Jackson's youngest daughter, Tanya, just 8 years old, began suffering from alarming health issues, persistent headaches, vomiting, dizziness, and a noticeable loss of coordination. After weeks of unanswered questions, specialists at Columbia Children's Hospital delivered the crushing diagnosis medulloblastoma, a rare and aggressive brain tumor located in the cerebellum, the part of the brain that controls movement and balance. Freddie was floored. He had always kept his family out of public view, but this crisis thrust him into a new reality. Tanya underwent emergency surgery, followed by months of radiation and chemotherapy. The treatment saved her life, but not without consequence. She lost partial mobility on her left side and experienced lasting weakness in her grip and balance. Jackson spared no expense. He transformed part of their home into a therapeutic space and invested heavily in top-tier pediatric care, speech therapy, and neurorehabilitation. But even more than money, he gave his time. He stepped back from touring and studio work to be present for every milestone, every slow, shaky step Tanya relearned. Though she survived, the experience left a mark on both father and daughter. Tanya grew into a resilient young woman, now working as a youth mentor and cancer survivor advocate. Her strength inspired Jackson to revisit his music with a new lens. His post-2000 recordings became more contemplative, grounded in themes of endurance and silent strength. Behind the chart-topping success was a man brought to his knees not by fame or failure, but by the helplessness of watching his child suffer. Freddie Jackson's most powerful notes were never sung on stage, but whispered in hospital rooms where love became the only medicine that truly mattered. These powerful stories remind us that even the brightest stars carry burdens the world may never see. Behind the fame, fortune, and flawless performances were fathers who traded sold-out tours for hospital vigils and recording sessions for therapy appointments. Their love ran deeper than music. But now we ask you, do these untold struggles change how you see these legends? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support Legends of Black Excellence as we continue uncovering the human truths behind Black icons who shaped history not just through sound, but through sacrifice.